Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about the antebellum issues and the age of Andrew Jackson. So we're going to talk about those rising issues before the Civil War, kind of the rumblings that start happening at this time period that are going to make irreconcilable differences when we get to the election of Abraham Lincoln later. And this very polarizing figure of Andrew Jackson. Even today, when you discuss Andrew Jackson and his presidency and his actions and especially his legacy, people choose one side or another, and we are so far away from Andrew Jackson's time and when he was elected as president. At this point, we're almost 200 years away from that moment, and yet people still feel a certain way about it, that they go, ugh, Andrew Jackson, or they go, ugh, Andrew Jackson, a man of the people. So we're going to be looking at that today and really kind of pulling apart what you think about Andrew Jackson, and also keeping in mind your historical lens, because you're coming into this with a 2017 vision about, how we treat people, how things are done, how the government works, liberal versus conservative, all those different ideas. And you need to remember Andrew Jackson, 1800s perspective, his own ideas, his own culture of America at that time period. So keep that in mind as we, analyze Andrew Jackson. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some things that are inexcusable in history, no matter the time frame and the culture and then all of that, because it's just, there's some things that are just gross no matter which way you slice that piece of cake. So, where do you stand on things, and where does your historical hindsight and your own personal bias come into analyzing good old Andrew Jackson? Okay, so when we talk about Andrew Jackson, we first and foremost have to talk about the rise of democracy. So the American Revolution, great stuff, so awesome, except even afterwards, it was mostly restricted to just white propertied men voting. And property meaning you had to own, it depended on the state, but sometimes it was 5 acres, you was usually 10 plus acres, and owning 10 plus acres meant you were a very wealthy, well-to-do individual. You weren't just some, Joe Schmo, like farming a little bit and blacksmithing on the side. No, you were, you had it together. You typically then were able to afford to go to college and things like that, things that your average person wasn't able to afford to do. But states like Pennsylvania and Vermont, kind of during the Revolution, but right after the Revolution, are going to give all voting privileges to all men that pay their taxes, was their idea. So everyone pays their taxes. Well, most everyone pays their taxes. No matter how much land you own, no matter any of it, that everyone's subject to paying taxes. And so they open it up. Even still, every other state, it's mostly landowning men that are going to be dominating society. And remember, this is large landowning men. In Maryland, actually, reformers in Maryland are going to call upon this idea of republicanism. They say republicanism is founded on the idea of equal rights. That's our rhetoric, right? That's part of who we are. That's part of our American identity. And this qualification of property in order to vote is a form of tyranny. It's a form of, classism, that you are restricting this privilege to one class of men and then giving them all the power, and you're denying it to everyone else. Who cares about women and African Americans at this point? Okay, they're concerned about men. So don't think that they're like, give the vote to everybody. No, they're like, give the vote to all white men. Is that radical notion. And anyways, so they're going to then extend the right to vote to all white men, no matter how much property they own. Wow, we're just debasing society here. And with that, the political landscape is going to shift entirely, because how people look at candidates is going to change, from this well-off, well-to-do, where were you educated, who's your family, doesn't really matter anymore. It matters how you appeal to the public. How real are you? Those things that we concern ourselves with today of where do people stand on issues, not necessarily sometimes how good looking are you when you talk about JFK and Richard Nixon and all that, but things that are hopefully more core values are going to become something that's more pivotal to voting and the election process, which means then too the political landscape starts to shift and change. With that as well, you're going to see that the political parties are going to develop into political machines, that they're bringing people across from diverse social and economic groups in order to get them to vote, that we can move all these different people, all these people who kind of believe in us, to vote for us. So when we see the rise of democracy and we see those political machines coming into effect, these political parties, these political candidates that are mobilizing the population that believe in them and, encouraging them to go out and vote, we also see the rise of what's known as the spoils system. And so in the spoils system, this starts off with Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren is running for a position in the New York legislature. And he is going to, actually it's a position within the New York government that's going to kind of nominate people for the bureaucracy. Anyways, don't need to know all that. He is going to, motivate his political machine called bucktail supporters. They're called bucktail supporters because they wore these hats that had actually bucktails of deer on them. So I think it's hilarious. I think we should bring that back. Anyways, and so he motivates them, they come out, they vote, support him, gets elected, awesome stuff. And part of his job is to appoint people to New York's bureaucracy. It's like 6,000 people. And he's going to, put in his friends and party supporters. That's kind of considered this idea of the spoil system, to whom the winner is, the spoils go, right? That's how the idea works, that if you're the winner, you get to decide who you get to surround yourself with. And while, it just kind of makes sense that you're going to make it your own political party and people who help to get you there, because the idea is then you're going to fill yourself with like-minded people who are going to support you and help you along the way. That goes against the idea of meritocracy, of your own merit of who you are as a person brings you to your position rather than who you know and who have you rubbed elbows with, who have you helped along the way to get you that job. And so the spoil system is something that is very, common, especially when we talk about presidencies and who they fill into positions along the way. It's going to, be staunchly pose this idea of meritocracy, of your own merit getting into places. So this is going to, enrage a lot of people when they talk about, oh, you just got that job because you know so-and-so, because you helped them get elected, whatever that might be. So there's going to be frustration there. Andrew Jackson's actually going to be a very large portion of the spoil system, and that's something he's going to be very into during his presidency, and people will find that frustrating. Okay, Henry Clay's system. Henry Clay is going to be a nominee in the election of 1824, which I'll talk about in a minute, and a position he's going to run on is this thing that he is going to call Henry Clay system. And he's going to become John Quincy Adams' Secretary of State. And when he becomes the Secretary of State, he's going to put into position his Henry Clay system. The Henry Clay system is going to put on protective tariffs that's going to help to protect our businesses here, to stimulate manufacturing. When we stimulate manufacturing, then we're also going to federally subsidize to encourage the building of roads and canals in order to facilitate businesses trading with each other, our commerce, right? So we are protecting our own individual business. We're helping to increase the transportation networks. And when we're doing that, we're also going to have the national bank that's going to control credit and provide a uniform currency that, again, is going to help encourage trade. And encouraging trade, we're going to then, just better the entire economy and all of that. When we talk about this, the Northeasterners and the Midwesterners are then going to support these ideas, but the Southerners are going to go against it because they feel like that it is just that Northern mentality of we are better than thou. It's going against Jefferson's ideas. Sorry. My lips feel dry. Anyways, so we're also going to have this tariff battle. It's just forever ensuing all throughout history, taxing imported goods. That there is frustration with that because it is going to hurt somebody in the end, but it benefits other people. And usually it's going to be benefiting our manufacturers and our businesses, which at this time are centered in our Northeast. And it's going to be hurting our farmers who are going to be making things like cotton, those raw materials, and they're going to be frustrated and angered with that because they aren't seeing those increased money they're making. If anything, it's making a monopoly on who they get to sell their products to, and they find that frustrating that they can only sell their cotton to this particular area, and that they have to accept whatever price that they're given. And so that's going to be a lot of frustration. So you're seeing those clashing of ideas between North and South, and frustrations over tariffs that just continues on and on forever and ever. Amen. So the Henry Clay system is going to be put into place under John Quincy Adams' presidency. And the tariffs are going to be a very, very large part of John Quincy Adams' presidency, and that frustration over them is huge, huge across the nation. So John Quincy Adams is going to eventually, towards the end of his presidency and throughout it, he's going to be seen as aloof, that he's not really in touch, that he's too sympathetic to Native Americans, that he's, overly moral and paternalistic and like holier than thou, and very like they call him the last notable president of these people who were put into place by the propertied men. And so John Quincy Adams is going to run for re-election in 1828 and well, anyways, okay. So election of 1824. I will talk about that in a minute. But at the end of, so I'm talking about this all kind of out of order, but pretty much after the election of 1824, John Quincy Adams, oh, I have to sneeze. John Quincy Adams, who is James Monroe, James Monroe, Secretary of State. John C. Calhoun, Secretary of War. William Crawford, Secretary of Treasury. Henry Clay, who was a hard-drinking man, but also the dynamic Speaker of House of Representatives. And then Andrew Jackson, who is a senator from Tennessee at this point, who, people love, all that good stuff. The election is going to be split. And in the election being split, the top three then are going to go to the House, because no one candidate has the majority of votes. So the top three then go to the House for them to vote and decide how things are going to go. And the congressmen in the House are going to be fearful of Andrew Jackson because they feel like they call him a military chieftain. They're scared of like what he can do. Like, he's a wild cannon. We don't know what's going to happen there. And then Henry Clay, who's already in the House, is going to say, you know what, guys? It's okay. Like, I don't want to be president anymore. Let's whip these votes for John Quincy Adams instead. I feel like he's the best of these candidates, including myself. So let's help him out. In helping Adams secure the votes, John Quincy Adams is going to go to Henry Clay and say, thank you so much for helping secure those votes for me to be president. I appreciate it so much. And I'm going to make you Secretary of State then. And that's where Henry Clay's system comes into place. In that's going to be called the corrupt bargain. Andrew Jackson's going to be enraged, as well as his supporters are going to be enraged with the government and the system put in place. So a lot of frustration over the election of 1824, how it ends up, and then ultimately just how the whole presidency of John Quincy Adams proceeds, who it benefits, and who falls behind. Okay. So like I said, the election of 1824. So we have all of these candidates. So technically we're all still the Federalist Party at this point. That's going to break down by the election of 1828 though. And no one has the majority, goes to the House. House then votes, and John Quincy Adams will become president. But you see this guy, Andrew Jackson, coming onto the national playing field. That he was a war hero from the War of 1812, we know that. And he's going to be influential in the Battle of New Orleans. People love him. He's, very popular. He is going to be born poor in Tennessee, although arguably North Carolina also says he was born there. Born in the backwoods. Records aren't clear. We don't even exactly know what year he was born. So he is going to be born into poverty. He's going to work his way up, become a war hero, going to become a lawyer. He is going to own a large plantation in Tennessee. It's actually still in Tennessee. It's called the Hermitage. It's kind of outside Nashville. So if you're ever down that way, you can see the Hermitage. And actually, I've been there. There's slave quarters that Andrew Jackson, that's the original house that they had lived in when the Hermitage was first founded. And so when they, built the bigger house that they then eventually moved into, they had, their old house that was the main house. And so, he said, well, this house is just too nice to be slave quarters, and it can't be, 2 stories, and my main house be 2 stories. So they took off the second stories because they felt like the slaves didn't deserve to have a nicer house, or almost as nice of a house as them. Crazy. Okay. Anyways. Andrew Jackson. So he's going to become a slave owner. He's going to own a plantation. He's going to be called, Old Hickory, that he is relatable. He's a guy that people connect to. He's very into this idea of democracy, fighting for the common man, whoever, that might be in the idea of Andrew Jackson, and, going into a part of that. And he is going to be a very polarizing political figure. I mean, I know today you guys think that Donald Trump is a polarizing political figure, and you look at our political landscape and divisiveness across our country. If people are this angry and this divisive about Andrew Jackson in 2017, and this happened in 1824, you can only imagine how divisive and just intense the nation was at the time period that Andrew Jackson was around. He's just an extremely memorable president. He'll be elected in 1828, and he's going to serve for two terms. He's going to run as a Democrat and will win. Democrats at this time, though, think that they're the Southern politics. They're the conservatives during this time frame. And he's just a very memorable guy, and just, very much kind of this view of the common man is his whole running platform, and how people view him. When he gets elected, at his inauguration, and pretty much at the end of his speech, he's like, everyone, party at my house, which is the White House. And when he comes up, like, people just come and they're wild and partying, just like everyday people. Like, you're just like there to see the inauguration and like party at the White House. You're like, what's up? Let's go. And like, it's so insane that like there's just people everywhere on the lawn of the White House. Like, it took the servants a week to clean up after the inauguration party's over. Andrew Jackson just straight leaves his inauguration party because it's just like too wild for him. Like, his parrot cursed so much because he cursed so much that at his own funeral his parrot is thrown out because it was cursing and it was upsetting the ladies. So I mean, just, you're looking at an individual who in history just has these just like things that bring him to this idea of the common man, and these pieces that he adopts a Native American like orphan boy right off the battlefield, and he actually adopts two Native American boys. Both of them are going to die in childhood diseases, but there's this piece of oh wow, it's touching. He's done things that are very big of him, but also you see him as a slave owner. You see part of the Indian Removal Act, but when you also look at the Indian Removal Act, you're looking at it benefiting the white settlers there, but it doesn't benefit the natives. But in a way, it was thought to maybe benefit the natives because then there would no longer be that conflict between the white Americans and the natives. It's a whole lot of stuff. Andrew Jackson, very polarizing figure, so many different views on him, and really, like, how do you view him, and what hindsight do you bring into it, and what point do you see things as just the actions for what they are, no matter what? Okay, sorry, I just get so fired up. He's just such an interesting guy. Okay, so first piece of Andrew Jackson's presidency is the nullification crisis. So the tariffs. South still hates the tariffs. They're not a fan, and they're still in place. And South Carolina is going to be the only state with a black majority, 56% of the population, and they're fearing a rebellion by the slaves. So slaveholders in South Carolina are going to criticize the tariff. They're going to argue for lower rates, and they're going to want a public discussion away from the British in order, because the British at this time are ending slavery in the West Indies, and they're like, well, that's awkward. So the tariff is going to be reenacted in 1832. South Carolina is going to adopt an ordinance of nullification in November of 1832. So they declare the tariffs null and void. They're like, see what you're doing, federal government, but like, hard pass. We don't want to do that. And at that point, it's awkward for Andrew Jackson because his vice president, John C. Calhoun, which is just an interesting looking fellow, go Google him, it's hilarious. Anyways, John C. Calhoun is from South Carolina, so you see that kind of, favorable in-house notion of like, we should support them and what they want. But Jackson is also, believing that the Constitution is giving the federal government the power to establish tariffs. The federal government is over the state government. State governments don't get to decide things like that. If the federal government has called the shots, they've made the decision about tariffs, it is not your job, state governments, to question why. It's your question to do it. So, he sees this as South Carolina challenging the power of the federal government. So Andrew Jackson then is going to be granted power by Congress to use military force in South Carolina to say, hey, follow the federal law. And so that's what he's going to do. He's going to go into South Carolina. South Carolina pretty immediately is going to give up and, follow the tariff then. But you see this question of southern states being frustrated with the established government and their choices they're making and trying to go against that. And the federal government's going to step in and say, hey, listen up. You have to say what, you have to follow what we're doing. And ultimately, that's going to lead to a lot of resentment that's going to be built up until the 1860s. Okay, Andrew Jackson, again, polarizing figure. So politicians had supported the Second National Bank, which was established in 1816. After the First National Bank just doesn't get renewed with the charter from Thomas Jefferson, going to get reestablished after the War of 1812. Anyways, and they want to maintain the bank's role in stabilizing the money supply. And the bank is going to maintain a cautious monetary policy by the creditors. It's going to be in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. The opponents of the bank, though, are going to oppose federal banks, and they're not going to be supporters of it. And so the bank is renewing, its charter's up for renewal, and Jackson's going to veto that charter, and he's going to say the bank is subversive and it is dangerous to the liberties of people. Jackson's going to be reelected shortly after that, and Van Buren is going to be elected as the vice president instead of John C. Calhoun. And people are going to believe that Andrew Jackson is correct in criticizing the Second National Bank and, that monetary policy. So early in 1833, Justice Taney, whom Taneytown is named for, is going to be appointed head of the Treasury Department. And Taney is going to withdraw the federal government's gold and silver from the Second National Bank. He's going to deposit that into several different state banks. Public debate is going to continue on. In 1836, Jackson does not renew the Second National Bank's charter, and so they will die off. Okay, this is probably the most controversial piece of Andrew Jackson's presidency. So there are tribes down here in the South of the Cherokee, the Creek, the Seminole, the Choctaw, it says it down there, the Chickasaw. Okay, yeah, I think that's everyone. Down here in the South, it's where they have resettled after the initial settlement of the United States and the colonies. And so there is a lot of clashing happening between white Americans who are trying to move into this territory and the natives there. So they're going to continue pushing natives westward, and the Cherokees are going to be one of the many groups that are going to accept and adopt white culture. And actually the Cherokee is going to be a conglomerate of several different tribes that are coming together, and they're going to write their own constitution based off of our constitution to try to say, hey, we're legitimate, we have a government, we have things in place, like we are our own people, we're our own nation, like respect that, like look, we're kind of like you, like just like woo, just accept who we are. And there is going to be just this attempt to integrate into American society, to try to maintain their own culture and their ancestral lands, and they feel like if they kind of befriend the white Americans that will happen. So Jackson's going to stop using federal troops to protect the Cherokee and their lands in western parts of Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Then after the federal troops are no longer there to protect them, there is going to be white settler Americans moving into the territory, and they're going to be taking over the land. There's going to be fighting happening. So, and this is going to be kind of Jackson's ending piece. He's going to sign the Indian Removal Act. And the Indian Removal Act is going to set up territory over here that says all those natives in those western territory, they have to relocate out to there, and once they relocate out to there, that's theirs. Like, we can't touch it. It is what it is. And it's going to be challenged by different evangelical Protestants. So you're going to say like, hey, this is not okay. But it's going to be passed in the House very narrowly, like barely passed. There's music coming from next door. They're going to create the western boundaries of that territory, and they're going to promise money and land to those who give up their land in the east. And violence is going to erupt. The Cherokees are going to challenge their removal in that land. They go to the Supreme Court in Worcester versus Virginia in 1832. When they go to the Supreme Court, they pretty much say that they just have to go. Like, it just is what it is. Like, that's been signed. You have to leave. And so their forced removal is going to begin in 1838, and that's where the Trail of Tears will take place on that 1,200-mile long journey into the new territory. Approximately 3,000 Cherokee are going to die on that journey, both from starvation and exposure, and they'll be forced off their land. So this is usually, when we talk about Andrew Jackson, the most infamous piece within his presidency. I don't know if you can hear that in the video. It sounds like drums next door in Mr. Smith's room. Okay. Jacksonians' impact. Okay, so in talking about Andrew Jackson's impact, when you talk about the Taney Court, so Justice Taney is going to serve a long tenure as Chief Justice from 1835 to 1864. He is a large advocate for states' rights and free enterprise. And he's going to enhance the regulatory role of state governments and regulating federal laws, federal government, all of that. And they're going to rule themselves as that police power and and that. Okay. And talking about states and their idea of what they're doing, we have this idea of laissez-faire, which is known as, in French, hands off, right? Like, let it run, let it be free. And that is going to be limiting the role of the government in the economy, that you should let things go. You shouldn't be intervening, that capitalism is at its finest when you aren't becoming a part of it. Okay, so I included this lovely little chart because it was deeply confusing when we talk about political parties, like these different political parties coming onto the scene and developing. You're sort of like, oh my gosh, Miss Bell, this is so much. Okay, so over here we have the Democratic Republicans. Federalists are gone, right? Democratic Republicans are going to break off into the Democrats and the Whigs. So here we have our Democrats, Andrew Jackson, and then we see the establishment of the Whigs into here, and they're developing into the National Republicans in the anti-Masonics. Okay, so that's when you see the establishment of the Whig Party. The Whig Party is going to be established in 1834. They're going to develop into our Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln. But they're going to initially oppose Jackson's policies. They see him as king-like. They feel like he is, not really following the government in his role. They are going to identify themselves with pre-revolutionary ideas, that they're going to oppose the arbitrary actions of the king. They're going to be supporters of political candidates that are, wealthy and talented and able-bodied, and not like men of people. Like, I've been to Harvard. I have, served as a judge, whatever, that they have merit to them. The Whigs are not going to be as strong as in the South as they are in the North. And that's because they disagree with the Democrats going against high tariffs and social mobility. They are going to unite against the common foe of the Southern slave owners and the working class of enslaved blacks, as well as the propertyless whites are going to be Whigs. And Whigs is a term that comes from a British political group. Okay. So just know Democrats are the conservative, Whigs are going to be your more liberals during this time period, and then they're going to develop into the Republican Party. We're also going to see the Know Nothing Party emerge not long after this, and they're going to be a third party, and that will kind of branch into the Republican Party. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this beautiful lecture about Andrew Jackson. If you have questions, please sign up for Key Time, or post your question to Edmodo, email it to me, or put it into your class's homework question box when you come in. I hope you enjoyed this awesome, beautiful, kind of long lecture on Andrew Jackson. Sorry, I just get so worked up. He's just an interesting guy. Hope you learned a little bit.